Hello, fellow global citizens. I'm E-Celebrity Tristan of Primal Edge Health. You may have heard of me. If not, well, whatever. I'm here to heal you with the power of music, to remind you of the healing power of celebrity, in joining the choir of angels of E-Celebs and celebrities, singing John Lennon's amazing globalist tome, Imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the healing, soothing sounds of my voice and my E-Celebrity importance, washing over you, healing you of all your misfortunes. I know many of you may have lost your jobs, many of you may have lost your freedoms, many of you may soon lose more of those freedoms. But I want to remind you that as an E-Celebrity, I love you. I love you so much. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. You just need the right crisis. And people will beg you. Imagine all the people locked in quarantine. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Powerful, right? You're welcome. I want to remind all the other E-Celebs and celebrities out there to use your voices, use your power, use your status as idols for the good, for the greater good. Stay in your homes, watch television, and wait for more orders. Good job. Good global citizens signing out. What's up, bigots? We're live. I got here my buddy Garland Farms out in Texas, coming at you from the lockdown in Ecuador. Let's see, I gotta change my mic for. There we go. JD, can you hear me, man?
I can hear you.
There we go. Coming at you from Ecuador and Texas. You got grass-fed, regenerative rancher JD Garland over here. You got aspiring E-Celebrity, Primal Edge Health, Tristan over here. And we're going to talk to you guys about some important issues today. We're going to talk to you about washing your hands, guys. Washing your hands. Make sure. No, I'm kidding. We're here to talk all about some of the important issues facing the American farmers, facing the American ranchers. JD Garland's out there on the front lines in the U.S., providing good grass-fed beef. He's got some grass-fed cattle behind him. He's got that Texas barbed wire fence behind him as well. Look at that big, beautiful green patch of land behind you, man. It looks nice over there right now. Uh-oh. You're muted. There you
It's
go.
springtime here in Central Texas, and we just got a big rain, so it looks good.
Nice. We got hard rain today too, man. We had some lightning and thunder. It was like an hour of really hard rain, and then it just stopped.
How often does it rain there?
I mean, it depends. We have a 6-month rainy season, but the rainy season is kind of intermittent. Like we'll get 2 to 3 weeks at a time where there's very little to no rain, and then maybe dump for a few days, and then heat up for a bit. A lot of the rain seems to evaporate off quickly, and it gets. Today's rain was pretty hard. I don't know how much of it. A lot of it kind of just washes down because it's real steep hillsides here. Very low quality soil, like rock and clay, which like you got nice and flat behind you, which is great for cattle.
Yeah, this is the Texas hill country, so we have a lot of hills, but we have flat spots as well. So that's good.
Nice. So JD Garland, he was in the chat the other day on the Fuang Tefano debate where Frank didn't show up and then lied to his audience and said he didn't even know about the debate, even though we have extensive proof that Frank definitely knew about the debate. I know you and Frank have had your own run-ins concerning some of these issues that we're going to talk about today. I know that you've definitely got a very interesting perspective on this whole world of beef in the U.S., beef production in the U.S., the American farmer, something we talked about a lot on this channel, the destruction of the American farmer, the destruction of the small family farm and the small family ranchers. And yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. So JD and I have been talking about this behind the scenes a little bit. He's definitely given me significant insight into some of the major issues that are facing us. It's not just the grain subsidies that we're dealing with. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond just the grain subsidies. So, yeah, where do you think a good place to start is with the destruction of the small family farm and with the topics that we're talking about today? Where do you think we should start?
Well, do you have one of those graphs that shows the decline of the American rancher
Yes, let's
over,
see.
especially since NAFTA was passed?
Absolutely. So you've got, where is that there? There we go. America's ranches are fast disappearing. You know what I can do? I can pull up. Oops. Let me put it in studio mode real quick. All right, so let me pull up this graph for the folks here. Open this. How do I open it? That's fine. Window capture.
While you're doing that, I'll tell everyone that Frank did email me and he asked me to apologize for exposing him, I guess.
Okay. That's nice of him. He asked you to apologize for exposing him.
Yeah, I told him in so many words to kind of get lost. And then
Uh-huh.
he went live stream shortly after that and told all of his audience that I had actually apologized to him.
How nice of him.
He is he's anything but honest, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it was a funny stream the other day. It was a long time coming. It was a long time coming, and man, I just couldn't bite my tongue any longer. It was impossible for me to bite my tongue any longer. So let's find this. I got it in the downloads. All right, it's been a busy day today. Actually, right before this, I was moving the sheep. And damn it. All right, there we go. America's ranches are fast disappearing. So this is a graph of America's ranches. Who put this one together?
That was Bob Bullard or Bill Bullard of the CEO of RCAF.
RCAF, who's an organization that I've been in a little bit of contact with. I've actually been meaning to call Bill. They're a really cool organization. When I emailed them, they gave me Bill's number. They said, here's Bill, the CEO's phone number. And so there we go. So America's ranches quickly disappearing. Now, what year is this starting? This is starting in 1980?
I don't have it up in front of me.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah.
Here, I can pull it. I'll feed your video from my video on OBS. How about that? Now you see it.
Yeah.
But it's really small because you see what the audience sees there.
Right. If you look right up there near the top left corner, you see an arrow where you can barely read NAFTA. That's when NAFTA was enacted, implemented in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And it was shortly after that, or virtually immediately after that, that you began to see steep decline of the number of ranches in the United States producing beef, pork, chicken, etc.
So what happened here? I mean, we got 925,000 number of operations. 925,000 was 100,000 operations there, and it drops down to about 725,000 in just a few
Right.
years. From 1990 to 2017, this graph is, and I'm sure it's decreasing even more now.
Yeah, it's even steeper, especially right now with what's going on in the world. You've got a lot of these poor ranchers have bought into the uh, destructive paradigm of grain feeding their beef. And in order to do that, you've got to go to the bank and take out a loan every year for the large amounts of overhead costs that you incur. And they just hope that when they take their beef to the packers, like Tyson and Cargill, that they're paid enough for the live cattle to net some type of profit. But as time goes by, hopefully by the time we get to the end of this live stream, people will see that that is the furthest thing from the truth of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So 1994 NAFTA happened. This kind of opened up the gates for imported foods, right? I mean, a lot of imports from other countries were able to come in and slam the American market and basically undercut American producers, right?
Right. I don't know if you remember, Ross Perot ran for president right before that happened, and it was being presented to the U.S. Constituencies as something that would help all industry in the United States. But there's been a concentrated focus on the those in Washington, D.C., who are under the influence of lobbyists, not only domestic, but international lobbyists, globalist lobbyists that, are funneling cash and other things into the pockets and well-beings of people in government that don't exactly have the people's interests in mind. And so one of the things that Ross Perot saw coming was exactly that. And he described it as a giant sucking sound that would occur in regard to things like American beef producers, the steel market, all kinds of manufacturing processes. And we've seen exactly that happen.
Right.
Yeah. So, especially right now, if you go over to RCAF's YouTube channel, they've got their latest video talks about how this latest crisis really sheds a spotlight on how this system is broken. Americans would do well to make sure that their food is being prepared in the United States by Americans. And if it's being produced outside of the United States or within the United States by foreigners, then in a situation like this, you may have a really bad situation on your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we see right now is kind of a revealing of just how fragile our food system is, right? Incredibly fragile food system. I've got the RCAF YouTube channel pulled up. Yeah. But our food system, it is so fragile. It's so hyper centralized, but also the way the distribution networks are incredibly fragile. And I think everybody's kind of seeing that now. Like as local supermarkets are emptied of food, people are starting to think, well, where the hell does my food even come from? Where does my food come from?
Yeah, a lot of people are going to the grocery store here in the United States and finding out for the first time that their beef is not actually manufactured in the grocery store.
Yeah, they think the cow's just out there eating the wheatgrass shoots off of the out of the little canisters and getting butchered in the back there. But that's not exactly how it happens. So what is the typical steak that somebody's going to buy in the supermarket, right? Say somebody's going to Ralph's or Albertsons or CVS or I don't know, Kroger or whatever the heck you live, You're going to the supermarket, you're buying some beef off the counter, big marbled steak. What is the usual line of production that goes into that steak?
Okay, the standard line of production that goes into your regular old supermarket beef is these calves are captured and tied down, castrated, and then a growth hormone injection, like a time-released capsule, is inserted under the skin, along with either antibiotics, or over time antibiotics are administered through the feed, or with a shot. And so you've got growth hormone, various different kinds of growth hormones. And speaking of growth hormones, that's one of the reasons why the U.S. is having such a time trying to get China to accept imports from the United States. It's because China actually has more strict rules when it comes to residues in the meat in regard to hormones and pesticides and other agrochemicals that end up tainting the meat. I know that there are some National Cattlemen's Beef Association associates that have claimed that there's no difference between grain-fed beef and grass-fed beef. But the truth is that the study that they continue to refer to in regard to that was funded by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is controlled by companies like McDonald's and Tyson Foods and Cargill.
Yeah.
And that study, by the way, and this is one of, I'll say his last name here, at least now at this point, Baker likes to refer to this study. Well, guess what? That study was never published. It was never peer reviewed. It's not really science.
So you're talking about there was a study that some people have referenced to say that, look, on paper, grain-fed beef versus grass-fed beef, there's really not such a big difference, right? So that's right. And Sean Baker, I think, has before referenced that study. So that one hasn't been studied. Yeah. So you're saying that might not be the greatest reference. It might not be a very reputable or even peer-reviewed study.
I'll go out on a limb here, Tristan, and I'll say that referencing a study that was never published is probably not something that should be bolstering that person's credibility.
Yeah.
If it was never published, never peer-reviewed, and you're an MD purporting, claiming to be approaching this from a science perspective, at least publish the work so that we can examine it before you reference it.
So this study, how did it say that, well, look, grass-fed beef, grain-fed beef, there's really very little nutritional difference is what the claim is. What did it actually show in the study?
I'm glad you brought that part of the subject up, because what they actually referred to was that, and again, we can't examine the study yet because they haven't published it. But if they ever do publish it, we do want to figure out how they came to this conclusion. But before we do that, let's admit that the conclusion itself, even if it's fictional, is irrelevant, because there's two schools of thought when it comes to heart disease. The old school of thought is the old cholesterol myth. It's been debunked over and over.
Right. Anyone who's watched this channel long enough doesn't believe that cholesterol causes heart disease, right? It's going to clog up your arteries like fat in your pipes. If you're sticking lard down your drain pipe, you're going to clog up your arteries just like that. I mean, nobody who's really studied it's going to believe that anymore. Maybe some vegans still tout that shit, but no one buys that either.
The original guy that brought that forward had, as far as I'm concerned, has been exposed as a fraud. His name is Ansel Keys, and he gathered data from, I think, 22 countries. And then in order to represent the result that he wanted, he had to trim that down to 6 countries so that he could draw the relationship between saturated fat and heart disease,
Mm-hmm.
and that's related to the cholesterol myth as well. Yeah, so this study that Sean Baker likes to reference was, number one, it was funded by the corrupt National Cattlemen's Beef Association, also known as the NCBA.
Which we're going to get into. We're going to get into this
Hugely,
association. Yeah.
yeah, hugely corrupt organization, anti-American, corrupt as can be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was funded by them, and then it was never published. It was written about in the NCBA associated literature, but it was never published. And beyond that, it delves into, or it hangs its credibility on that old discredited cholesterol myth.
Yep.
There are two different approaches to what's causing heart disease. The old discredited one is the one that includes cholesterol as a blame. The other one is the inflammation, and I think that most people that are well read on the science realize now that the inflammation cause is the one that actually has been proven to be true. And part of that is related to the omega-6 and omega-3 ratio. Some people say that the ratio is not important. Other people say that it's just an overload of omega-6s, because omega-6s are known to be inflammatory. And grain-fed beef is very high in omega-6s compared to grass-fed beef.
Now, if we're gonna, just to be fair, so as far as like the ratio, right? The ratio omega-6 to omega-3 going to be significantly different in grain-fed beef, right? Way more omega-6 you're going to see in something that's fed on grass. But the sheer volume of omega-6 to omega-3 might not be as worrisome as if you were to eat something like, vegetable oil drenched bread or something like, some shitty loaf of bread that's got veggie oil in it and stuff like that. But that's still going to throw off your levels of omega-6. You don't want any omega-6 in your body. And there's even some people who say that omega-3 is something we should avoid as well, right? The theory that polyunsaturated fatty acids are super volatile and they're easily oxidized regardless of it's 6 or 3. So either way, even though it does have a smaller amount, it's probably best to avoid those omega-6s anyways, right? So at the quality level, I would say on paper, I would definitely disagree with that study. And, you don't want high omega-6 regardless of the quantity being large or not. You don't want any of that omega-6 in your diet.
Yeah, I actually think that some omega-6 in the diet is okay. In fact, it might be necessary. But I think what you're referring to as far as omega-6s and omega-3s being very they easily go rancid. And which is to say that if you buy fish oil so that you can procure some omega-3s, it's my belief that at least 9 times out of 10, you buy a little bottle with some fish oil or maybe even krill oil goes rancid really quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not talking about supplemental omega-3s, but the omega-3s and omega-6s that you would find in grass-fed beef, for instance, that hasn't been sitting out at room temperature for weeks or months, then the danger of those omegas going rancid is probably zero.
Yeah.
If it's been frozen since it was processed.
So what about, all right, so the omega-3 to 6 ratio, that's one issue. But this study, didn't it also say, oh, look, it's got less cholesterol in it. It's got less cholesterol total. Therefore, it must be better, which is kind of funny because, all right, so if it has less cholesterol, I guess is that per gram of beef? Because there's also way more fat usually on the grain-fed beef, right? They get it very, very fat by finishing it on a lot of grain. They get it as fat as it can before it starts to get sick. So it seems like even though it might have less cholesterol, is that by volume or how do they measure that?
Yeah, I think that is by volume, but consider this, that when you talk about grain-fed beef, what you're talking about most of the time is corn-fed beef. And so let's look at the omega-6 to 3 ratio of corn oil. Corn oil has a ratio of 49 omega 6s for every one omega 3. So if you're feeding corn to cattle, then the oil that they're getting in that corn has a 49-to-1 ratio of 6s to 3s. Now, as the cow is getting overwhelmed with these omega 6s, its only option physiologically is to take those omega 6s and store it in its body fat stores. And that is why grain fed beef, aka corn fed beef, has a high omega 6 content coming straight from the corn. So the corn, or the omega 6s in the corn, are known to cause the type of inflammation that causes heart disease and other ailments that are inflammation related.
So what about giving an animal, like, so here when we get the dry season coming through, right? We get organic corn that we can give to some of our animals, like even the sheep. Sometimes I'll get some corn, just little kernels of corn grown organically in the mountains around here. I'll soak it, ferment it for a day, and then give it to them. They seem to do all right with it. I'm not giving it to them exclusively. I'm not giving it to them in super high quantities. It's kind of a give it to them just as needed or as desired because they like it as a treat. What do you think about that? Because it seems like giving grain to animals is something that's been done for a long time. Like, it doesn't seem like it's something to me that's inherently bad, yet there does seem to be something majorly wrong with the way it's being done right now in the mass manufactured beef and the feedlot beef that's being sold.
Yeah, Tristan, I'm glad you brought that up because the truth is that traditionally we've always used grain, not only with ourselves to bridge one day of feast to another. You know, famines could always be bridged with gathering grain, and we not only fed ourselves in short spurts to bridge from point A to point B through a famine situation. That's where grains really serve humankind is a temporary famine, and the same is true for our domesticated ruminants that we've acquired over the years. Is that when it's dry or when it's wintertime, that's when we would traditionally harvest a certain amount of grains to mix with whatever forage would be available during the wintertime.
Yeah.
However, when springtime would roll around, the grass would normally start growing again, and then the grain supplementation would cease to exist. This is a completely different situation than what you are looking at when you come to two different things I'll address here. Is one is people ask, well, if you're raising grass-fed beef and your grass goes to seed, then grass seed is grain, so your cows are out there eating grain. So what is it exactly that you're complaining about?
Right. Or you're not spraying those fields with a bunch of glyphosate and destroying the soil, are you?
No, I'm not. And that's one of the important issues that should be addressed with that question. And the other one is that it's a completely different situation when the cow's diet is being peppered with natural grain that's growing out there on the stalk versus what happens in feedlots where concentrated amounts of corn are being fed to these cattle. And this corn has been sprayed, like you say, with glyphosate, which has been shown to lower IQ, amongst other things. Same thing with the fungicides that they spray on there. They're also associated with loss of IQ, along with cancer and killing a whole host of other animals in the ecosystem. And then also the corn that's used to feed grain-fed beef is really the king of the vegan kill cult, because the corn industry, they spray the lion's share of glyphosate. They spray the lion's share of pesticides. They sprinkle the lion's share of rodenticides. The lion's share of the industrial fertilizers, the nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium that has to be mined or created with large petroleum powdered factories. Uh, this is being sprayed on the corn.
Yeah.
And then these cornfields are heavily tilled. When you till soil, it brings a lot of oxygen into the soil. That oxygen causes a bacterial bloom. That bacterial bloom burns up gargantuan amounts of carbon out of the soil.
Mm.
That carbon enters the atmosphere, and it becomes another excuse for the globalists to levy taxes upon the plebs. And meanwhile, the soil is being robbed of carbon, and that's also causing the permeability of the soil to
Yeah.
go down in regard to water, so that when it rains, the rain falls on the soil cannot absorb the water. It a recently plowed field looks like it's very absorbent to water, but it is not. 99% of the water that will fall on a field on a big rain runs off into the local streams and tributaries.
Mm-hmm.
It carries all of those pesticides. It carries all of those industrial fertilizers into the streams and tributaries, enters large rivers, causes huge fish kills. It kills all kinds of mammals along the way. It finally makes its way into the ocean, and we have and the Great Lakes, etc. And then you have these red tides and green tides and different types of algal and algae blooms, and they're called harmful blooms. They go out there and decrease the oxygen in the water so much that you have these massive fish kills in the ocean. We
Yeah.
have oceanic dead zones all over the world, and this is being caused by primarily grain production. And when I say grain production, in this case, it's primarily corn. And so when you eat grain-fed beef, you're eating corn-fed beef, and you're supporting this machine that's destroying the water table, destroying wildlife habitat. It's the driving force in the rather fast wiping out of the manatees and dolphins, and you start looking into, well, just go watch the Vegan Kill Cult series and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's more destruction and animal death and suffering associated with the growing of the corn that feeds the corn-fed beef than there ever. Comparing that to regeneratively raised grass-fed beef is like day and night.
Yeah.
There's no similarities in the environmental effects of grain-fed and grass-fed beef, and there's certainly no similarities between grain-fed and grass-fed beef when it comes to the security of Americans in regard to their food production.
And I think that's the better argument than, right, the health argument, grass-fed versus grain-fed. A lot of people are eating, I mean, not to defend grain-fed beef, not to to shill for grain-fed beef, but there are people out there, they've eaten grain-fed beef and they've gotten their health back. Ex-vegans, they think they can't afford the grass-fed, they've gotten their health back. I think as far as the omega-6 to 3 ratio, to me, it doesn't seem like as good of an argument, just because this tiny amounts of omega-6 and 3 that are in there, right? But to me, it's like the food security issue, the not supporting these massive corporations who are consolidating the food supply, who've destroyed the small family farm, right? I would way rather see people supporting regenerative agriculture, going towards a model of food production that is not so fragile, right? Like when you're getting a guy, if you live in Texas, you can go to Garland Farms and you can get your beef directly from him. You can know exactly where it comes from. You can cut out the middleman, right? I mean, when you go to the grocery store and you buy that beef, how many stages removed are you from the actual producer, right? Like who's making the most profit when they're selling the stuff in the grocery store?
The packers are making the most profit. I think I sent you a graph that shows the difference between live cattle prices and retail prices.
Go look at that. So I got that one on Skype somewhere, but yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Right now, you're seeing a drop in live cattle prices, and you're seeing retail beef prices go up. This is bankrupting large amounts of American beef producers. because they don't have it. Most of them don't have a direct line. They don't have a pipeline into the retail market, so they have to sell to companies like Tyson Foods, Cargill, McDonald's, Wendy's, and all of these large producers. They also are these meat packers, and this is actually against the laws against monopolies in the United States, that they're actually producing their own beef, so that when we don't agree to sell at the low prices that they're demanding, then they just dip into their own supply until American beef producers are falling over themselves to give their beef away. And so they're actually systematically destroying the American beef producer. And this is coming from the USDA and the or the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the NCBA. Do you have that?
I'm looking. Yeah, I'm just cropping the window here. I'm cropping, transforming this thing, so I have to do window capture for some reason instead of just making a. All right. So yeah, I think as far as the reasons to support good regenerative agriculture, local food production, it definitely goes beyond just that the health argument is there, right? As far as the hormones that do get injected into it, which or the apologetics argument for the grain-fed beef is, well, the amount of hormones is so small, it's negligible. Right? What do you think about that argument?
Well, I think that that argument is pretty weak, because while they are correct if they're talking about a single serving, if you're talking about chronic intake, which is a daily intake of supermarket beef that's been corn-fed, then you're talking about a chronic consumption of growth hormone residue, pesticide residue. Now, if you don't believe me, look up what do pesticides and growth hormone in the diet do? Well, they cause cancers. They lower the immune system. They contribute to all kinds of very profitable diseases for the Rockefeller Medical Association. So like Sean Baker likes to say, if someone switches from eating Oreos for every meal to eating corn-fed beef for every meal, there is going to be an improvement in health. But that does not excuse the fact that grain-fed beef is far, far inferior to grass-fed beef in regard to nutrient density, in regard to the fact that we don't have the pesticide residue, et cetera, and the fact that the omega-6-3 content is more appropriate for what's been proven to be healthy for human physiology.
And you sent me some graphs, and some of these are really good. The second one you sent me, the U.S. beef cow herd is shrinking, hitting a 70-year low in 2014. Now, some people have said that this is a good thing, right? This shows that we're being we're being more efficient, right? We're more efficient with our production. We're using less land to grow more food. That's kind of the argument we're hearing from guys like Peter Ballerstedt and some of these other guys in the space who have connections. Peter Ballerstedt does have connections. He's open about it. He has connections to a grass company that genetically modifies and actually patents seeds, right? Now, when you look at this graph, the U.S. beef cow herd is shrinking. It went from over 45,000 cows back in, what was year is that? 1975. NAFTA implemented in 1994, and then it went down to about almost 30,000. What's that, like 32,000?
Yeah.
So isn't that a good thing? Do you think that's a good thing that there's less cows, as some of these people are saying?
It's a good thing that there's less cows. I don't really follow the logic.
Either do I. I don't know. I don't get why they're saying it's a good thing there's less cows, but it seems to be that they're what they're going towards is this argument about efficiency, right? Which is,
I don't know.
yeah.
Let's have every person that's watching right now, let's have them ask themselves, considering what's going on right now, because I know a lot of people that go to the grocery store right now and they try to buy toilet paper and no, it's not there. But guess what? They also go to buy some beef and guess what? It's not there.
Right.
So
Less cows means less food, you guys. Less cows means less access to good food. And it means that there's less cows close to you in your neighborhood.
Yeah. I was watching a video by Greg Judy here a while back, and he's a regenerative cattle producer.
I love that dude. He's great.
Yeah. And he told a story about how he was talking to one of the big meat packers representatives. Maybe it was Tyson or Cargill, but this guy was telling him, you need to get your cows bigger. You need to get them bigger, bigger. And the thing about a bigger cow is that it at a certain size, it starts to have a negative impact on the ecosystem.
Why is that? Is it like the scarring of the hoofs, how heavy it is drawing on the ground?
Let's say it rains and you've got a 1,500-pound cow, and you've got a whole herd of 100 1,500-pound cows walking out there, and after a rain, their hooves begin to work the soil, and if they weigh that much, they can actually decrease the return on that acreage on the next time around, as far as the rotational grazing schedule. So if you've got a cow that's going to top out at maybe 800 pounds or 1,000 pounds after that same amount of rain, those hooves are going to go out and they're actually going to deliver an appropriate imprint on the soil there that would actually stimulate the bacterial growth and the grass growth and the clover growth and the legume growth and the different multi-species scenario that you get with regenerative rotational grazing. And so the heavier the animal gets, the less conducive it is to regenerative ruminant agriculture. And so Greg Judy asked this meat packer representative, why do you want me to get my cows so big? Or no. What he asked was, how big do you want them? And this grain representative, this grain-fed beef representative said, well, if you could get them up to the size of an elephant, that would be ideal. And so Greg Judy looked at him and said, well, why do you want them to be that big? And he said, because then they can eat more corn.
What?
That's what it boils down to.
Why is it good that they would eat more corn?
Because corn is the industry that is in control of this whole thing. Corn is the industry that's subsidized. Corn, the companies that are heavy in corn are the companies that are heavy in meat, plant-based meat stuffs, Beyond Meat. And, that's another point that should be made tonight is most of these large meat packers are actually spearheading the vegan fake meat movement.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something we talked about before too. All these vegans are talking about how great it is that they have Beyond Burgers. But if you look at the investors, Tyson Foods was one of the biggest investors, right? These vegans think that there's some sort of an animal holocaust going on, and killing animals is like killing people. They're basically saying that it's cool that Hitler will sell you plant foods while he's creating his animal holocaust, right? Tyson Foods is, to the vegans, he's murdering millions of chickens. And but they think it's cool that he's going to make them the Beyond Burgers, right? So Tyson Foods is one of the biggest meat packers, right? One of the big four meat packers. Yeah.
These big four meat packers actually, I sent you some information on their hiring of influencers as well. And I believe that some of these vegans and some of these grain-fed beef proponents are actually influencers for the NCBA. The NCBA being controlled by companies like Tyson Foods and Cargill and McDonald's and Wendy's. So
here's the decline in the number of U.S. feedlots, 96 to 2018. Right, so I mean, we're seeing the consolidation of the food supply right here. What happened in 2013? Do you know? Like, why did that? It just got cut to almost a third of the amount of feedlots. That's a major consolidation that just happened there. Who bought out all those feedlots back then?
I, I think that what happened there was that, don't quote me on this, but I think that was the first time that Brazil and a bunch of these other
Mm,
countries started uh, exporting beef into the U.S. market,
yeah.
which caused beef producers to cry out for mandatory country of origin labeling, which the National Cattlemen's Beef Association lobbied hard and eventually won their battle and had country of origin labeling struck down so that Americans can no longer make an informed choice. What they found out, the NCBA found themselves rather chagrined because they found out that Americans were actually willing to pay a little bit more to buy beef made in the United States. And so they had country of origin labeling struck down. And now no American can go into the grocery store and make sure that they're buying American beef because there are no country of origin labeling uh, rules enforced anymore.
So the NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, who ranchers pay dues to, right? Like, so what do most ranchers end up paying to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association? Like, they're regularly paying into that, aren't they?
Yeah, if you raise cattle and you don't have a retail market to deliver packaged beef to, then that means that you have to deliver and sell live cattle to the meat packers.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a special tax that's levied against the seller of live cattle. It's called the beef checkoff. And they'll take $1 from every head of cattle that's sold, and they'll take 50 cents of every dollar. The USDA takes 50 cents of each dollar and sends it to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which turns out to be a private company that's run by companies like Tyson and Cargill. And then these companies hire social media personalities that they call influencers and other ways that they promote beef, but they promote beef in a very generic way. They don't support American made beef, they support beef. In fact, I sent you a quote from the NCBA talking about how, to them, it doesn't matter whether it was produced in the United States or some other country. Beef is beef, just like chicken is chicken and pork is pork.
There
Wait,
it
there
is.
it is.
This one, Manitoba, or the first one? In short,
Yeah,
beef is beef.
same. I sent you the two on same thing on accident. In short, beef is beef, whether the cattle was born in Montana, Manitoba, Mazatlan. The same goes for hogs, chickens, and other livestock.
Well, so
So
yeah,
that's
well, so now hogs from China, right? All this pork from China now, that's just the same, right? It's all just the same. Come on.
right. Yeah. The thing about the Chinese with pork is that the Chinese actually bought out American pork production. So the lion's share of pork production that is produced within the borders of the United States is actually owned by a company in China.
So Chinese companies owning a lot of the pork production in the U.S. You've got the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which people who are selling cattle are paying dues into it. They're paying $1.50 every time they sell a head of cattle. And that's run by the big four meat packers. And then they go and they hire influencers who think that they're just promoting beef in general, but really they're probably looking after not just beef, but the interests of the consolidated beef industry, which is owned by the same people that are producing all this plant-based kibble, right? The same people that are running most of the grain market. Cargill runs, what was it, like 49% of the global grain trade, or is it even more now?
Um, yeah, I'm being distracted. My wife is coming back from picking up groceries, and she's trying to honk the goats out of the way.
Uh-oh.
Okay, She's not honking anymore. So could you repeat? You said Cargill controls 50% of what?
I think it was 50% of the grain trade. I mean, somebody could look this up, the actual stat, but huge amount of the grain trade. Most of the grain trade is super consolidated. And that grain trade that's going into feeding all these vegans, that's going into growing more Monsanto corn, that's going into using more glyphosate to spray on our soil, to destroy our soil, which is getting washed into the oceans, which is destroying our guts, which is making us more susceptible to infections, which is wrecking our microbiome, making us more susceptible to, guess what? Viral infections, viral the pathogens, right? Everything that you could imagine that could permeate the gut is going to permeate it even better when it's been destroyed with glyphosate, right? So these same companies that consolidated the grain industry, that consolidated our food supply, that consolidated and destroyed the small family rancher, right? These same companies are pushing for vegan foods, are pushing for the Beyond Burger, because their biggest cash cow is not cows. Their biggest cash cow is the international grain trade. Am I right?
That's right. And that's why you'll find all the largest meat packers are also the same companies that are spearheading the fake vegan meats.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's actually more profit, and you also have to look and see that these there really are no isolated corporations anymore. When you talk about, like, for instance, Monsanto was recently purchased by Bayer.
Yes.
And Bayer owns, they own pharmaceutical companies, they own meat companies, they own grain companies, and you really don't want the same entity owning pharmaceutical companies as this owning the same, that company owning the company that's providing your food.
Mm-hmm.
Because it gets into a situation where it's like your mechanic that fixes the flats on your tractor. He also owns a nail manufacturing company, and they like to sprinkle nails in your driveway. Because then you get flats. Then you have to take your tractor in to get new, get your flats fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we've got with companies like Bayer, who are large players in the grain-fed beef industry.
Yeah.
that don't mind making you sick, because at the end of the day, when you get sick, they've got a company that sells you the pharmaceuticals that the doctors are willing to prescribe to you.
Yeah.
And of course, the doctors are willing to prescribe to you any medication that's patented and profitable. And they even do that without ever checking to make sure that your essential vitamins and minerals have been topped off.
And that's funny. And when you're looking at, it's funny because anybody who raises animals understands the importance of minerals, right? And no matter where you're at, you probably got mineral deficiencies in your soil of some sort. So mineral supplementation, especially if you're doing regenerative agriculture and you're trying to regenerate the soil, can be real important, right? And when you're giving mineral supplementation, you're actually, the minerals getting cycled through that animal and getting put back into your soil as well. So you have a mineral deficiency in your soil, you might want to be supplementing your animals with certain minerals, which will fix your mineral deficiency in your soil. This other way of doing it, where you're feeding them all this grain, where you're spraying your fields all the time, kind of does the opposite, doesn't it? But then it also is going to exacerbate a lot of these health issues that people have, because people are mineral deficient, right? But I think it's so funny that there's so much focus on drugs, there's so much focus on injectable products that are going to be highly profitable for pharmaceutical companies, yet they're not telling you about mineral balance for your health. But anybody who raises animals knows that if an animal is mineral deficient, it's going to show certain signs, right? Like you're talking about your goats out there, and I've never had an animal that was so mineral deficient that this happened. But what I've read is that goats and sheep and ruminants, when they get super mineral deficient, they'll get like listless, and they'll just want to bang their head against posts and walls, and they'll just stand there staring dead-eyed into the ground sometimes. Like they get like kind of retarded. But these pharmaceutical companies, these what do you call them? The big grain conglomerates, the people making our kibble, they don't seem too concerned with actually giving us, proper mineral balance, proper nutrition. And maybe be a conflict of interest if they're trying to sell you drugs on the back end too.
Yeah, one of the reasons why the soil has been depleted is because of the monocrop, the cropping that Cargill and Tyson are famous for. Monsanto has been involved in, and so forth.
Yep.
Uh, One of the reasons for that is because they're no longer relying on nature to provide these minerals. Normally, there'll be bacteria that exist in a symbiotic fashion along with a natural ecosystem of different species of grasses and legumes, etc. The bacteria lives in the soil. The bacteria has this relationship with the roots of these plants, and there's a give and take of sometimes carbohydrate, the plant root providing carbohydrate to the bacteria turning around and handing the plant what it needs as far as minerals. And then also when you do monocrop agriculture, like we find feeding the grain-fed beef, what you get is a bunch of plants out there that have a relatively short root system. But when you've got regenerative ruminant grazing, then most times after a certain period of time will turn back into like a natural prairie where the ecosystem is rich in biodiversity. Some of those plants have long tap roots, and those long tap roots will reach down and bring up water from below, minerals from below, and then that reintroduces those minerals to the more shallow depths of the soil. And so that's one of the reasons why regenerative rotational grazing of ruminants is so regenerative in regard to the health of the soil, because it brings that bacteria and those minerals back to those more shallow depths.
You know what's crazy too is it seems like, I mean, you were talking about Greg Judy earlier. He's a really good resource for anybody looking at getting into even just small scale, if you're looking at it, regenerative ranching. And it's really not that costly. Greg Judy talks about using leased land, right? Using other people's land that you don't even own to end up generating your own income while regenerating that land. And he's ended up getting like several lifetime leases where he was able to, without even purchasing the land, get lifetime leases on it and have actually have, you know, a very healthy income for him and his family from land that he's regenerating and never even had to buy. So it's
Yeah, one of the things that he points out, he's got a blueprint for doing that. And so anyone out there that wants to get into regenerative agriculture in regard to ruminants, go look up Greg Judy. He's got a full system. He's got seminars and everything that you can attend. But I'll give you some of the highlights of what he teaches is that agricultural land, when leased, the cost of the lease, according to him, is a tax deduction. And so whatever you spend on the lease, you get to write off that cost against your income. And the cost of leasing agricultural land is actually relatively very low, especially when compared to actually outright buying the property. And the difference between leasing the land and buying the land is that if you buy the land, the cost of that land is not actually a tax deduction. Whereas if you lease the land, it is a tax deduction. So he was able to use that to build these kind of a chain of separate farms where he would move his herd around and build the soil regeneratively. And a lot of the landowners turned around and saw what a wonderful job he did rehabilitating their properties, that they just turned around and offered him, like you said, a lifetime lease, because the people who own it, they love to see life come back to the property like it was, 50 years ago. And as a result of the way that Greg does things, he's able, last I counted, he was able to buy outright 4 of the farms that he was originally leasing.
Man, when I hear that story, it just warms my heart. I love that. So anybody watching here, we got a lot of people watching who are probably thinking about how fragile our food system is. A lot of people who might have been freaked out by this terror blitz that's been going on through media the last few weeks, and all these different countries around the world locking it down. I mean, where we live now, I'm just getting messages as we speak of, roads are being closed into the road down to the town next to us has been blocked off. They're blocking off with trees, different roads, and yeah, it sounds like things are stepping up as far as local communities are blocking off their community.
Especially young people, because we need more young people.
Sorry, that we weren't streaming for like 10 seconds. Go back to the beginning of what you said. Sorry. Now we're live.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say that we really need to. This is a perfect time for especially young people, because we need more young people participating in regenerative ruminant agriculture to enter regenerative agriculture. I had a point that I was going to make before we got interrupted with that pause. What was it? The number 5 million is in my head. I will say that in the next 15 years, there's most of the ranchers out there are 60 and above. So in the next 15 years, there's going to be a lot of agricultural land that becomes available. A lot of it will be available for lease. And I would encourage anyone out there that wants to get into regenerative agriculture to contact Greg Judy and see about taking some of his seminars, because I think that he's got a great blueprint for succeeding in the regenerative agriculture movement.
Yeah. Hopefully more people that are watching this are able to get into that. I think people, even if you're not going to go full on like Greg Judy teaches, you can homestead yourself, right? You can have food that you're producing on your own land without very much land. And
I'm glad you just reminded me what I was going to say is that I see in the news that they're predicting that there might be a recession, and I kind of laugh whenever I see that, because what did you say earlier? They're talking about shutting everything down for 18 months.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a recession here. We're talking about an engineered depression.
Yeah.
And I would make the point that back in the days of the first depression here in the United States, 90% of the populace were farmers. And under that scenario, there were 5 million people that starved to death. And so now you've got a situation where they're threatening us with an engineered global collapse of the economy, and almost virtually no one produces their own food.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of people are going to start trying to get into that really soon. Speaking of that, I just got a message on my phone. Hold on, I want to listen to this real quick. You guys can hear it too, but this is kind of important because roads are getting closed around us, and I got to see what just happened. There's like a message from the president of the town council here. Here, I'll turn it up so you guys can hear too. If you speak Spanish, you can understand. So most of you won't know what he's saying.
Queridos amigos de Vilcabamba, queridos conciudadanos de Vilcabamba, frente a los casos que se han confirmado en la provincia de Loja, he tomado la decisión de restringir la entrada a diferentes ciudadanos que intentan llegar a Vilcabamba. Lo vamos a hacer en las 2 entradas principales de Vilcabamba para tratar de evitar cualquier tipo de contagio y prevenirle a nuestro pueblo de el contagio del coronavirus. Es algo muy serio, por lo tanto vamos a proceder a cerrar las vías. La situación legal no nos permite, pero lo vamos a hacer por la seguridad de nuestra gente. Solamente pasarán o ingresarán gente que pase con alimentos de primera necesidad, gente con emergencias. En este instante me dirijo a la entrada principal de Vilcabamba para que no pueda ingresar nadie durante la noche ni tampoco en el transcurso del resto de los días. Que Dios los bendiga y juntos tenemos que...
So are they going to let people in and out for gas, or does that mean they're just going to let... What does he mean by essential services? Okay. All right. So here's like all the towns, they're all shutting it down. They're closing up roads and stuff and not letting people in and out. Everyone's all scared. Everyone's all frightened. Let me, trying to figure out if people are going to be able to get in and out with gas and stuff like that, which is kind of important. I got some gas, but it'll run out in a few weeks. So let me just pull this up here. I got some super chats. Let me read these super chats. Joshua Baker, what's up? Where's all the super chats? Only 2 super chats? Look at this crowd. This engineered recession. The engineered recession has hit YouTube too. Joshua Baker sends $2. Says, will grass finished affect the omega ratio? What do you think about that? Grass finishing, does that affect the omega 3/6 ratio there?
Well, the studies that I've read, grass finished beef, the omega 6 to 3 ratio is something between 1-to-1 and 4-to-1. So I think the grain-fed beef is around 14-to-1. So I don't think that it's going to cause a heart disease that's going to kill you, but if it is part of a high omega 6 diet, then it's going to very likely contribute to a heart disease situation. Did that answer the question?
Yes, good question. All right, so let's see. We got Cholo Mexicano says, I tell Mexicans that ranchers are the richest people on earth because they own land. Wait, let's see. That doesn't make sense. I tell Mexicanos that ranchers are the richest people on earth because they own land, become rootless cosmopolitans. They own land and don't become rootless cosmopolitans? Is that what you're saying? Oh, no, there we go. Wait, I got to just expand the window. Sorry, man. I couldn't read it all the way. Okay. Sorry. Cholo Mexicano, $5 says, I tell Mexicanos that ranchers are the richest people on earth because they own land, but they come to America to become rootless cosmopolitans. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that nuts? Right? People who own land sell that land off to try to go to America so that they can like live near celebrities. It's crazy. I agree, man. A lot of these Mexicans, they should stay there. They should realize what they've got, right? They should realize, there's another guy, Jim Elizondo. He is like a Mexican-American guy. He owns a ranch in Mexico, and I think he owns a ranch in Texas as well. He's another regenerative agriculture proponent who has some really good material online about how to do it. Harry Henderson, what's up, dude? Harry Henderson says, make it 3 donations. Right on, man. There you go. Harry Henderson sent in the super chat he's got a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger in his profile picture there. So thank you, Harry. Appreciate that, man. Thanks for the super chats, guys. Let me just see what's going on the stream here. We had 200 people watching for a while. A few people are dropping out. Nice to see you guys all here. Let's see. We got OK in the chat. We had Carnival in the chat earlier. Hope everything's going well, guys. All right. Back to the task at hand. So we've already talked about the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We've talked about the new American farmer, the selling off of the buying out of a lot of like the pork production by like Chinese firms, right? Which you've got a picture of the traditional American farmer right here. Wan Long, $1.5 billion net worth, chairman and CEO of meat processor WH Group. So Smithfield, there you go. He acquired Smithfield, the world's largest pork processor and hog producer. Now, wow, that's what we were talking about a little earlier. I guess. Do you have anything to add to that slide that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, what happened there is what is happening to the beef industry in the United States. It already happened to the pork industry. You had the USDA and other corrupt moneyed interests that are powerful in Washington, D.C., that were pursuing legislation that would encourage conglomeration of the pork industry. So you had smaller pork producers that were being driven out of business until they have to turn around and sell at low dollar to a large conglomerate. And then once those conglomerates get the lion's share of the pork production, then they all, the 3 or 4 of them turn around and sell out to, in this case, a Chinese company. So China actually owns over 90% of the pork production that occurs in the United States. Now, if that's the scenario that you think is conducive to your well-being as an American, then I would say, yeah, go ahead and keep eating grain-fed beef and use the fact that it's subsidized and cheaper to just keep eating it. And you're going to eat yourself into a situation where no American is producing any food for you anymore, and some other outside interest can turn off your sustenance like that.
And this is the most important thing.
Sean Baker.
So, all right. So when Sean Baker's saying, there's no difference between grass-fed and grain-fed, you're saying that's not true. I would take it that you think that is not true. That there's no difference between grass-fed and grain-fed, and we're not talking about the health issues here. We're talking about a whole different issue.
I would love to debate Sean Baker on this issue because he is wrong.
I bet he would talk to you. Maybe I can get Sean Baker on to talk to you about this specific thing in the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I want to get RCAF on next. So I think RCAF is going to be. I'm going to get a hold of. Was it Bullard? Is his name? Last name?
Bullard?
Bill Bullard. So I'm going to get Bill Bullard on, and then I'll reach out to Sean and I'll see if he wants to talk about some of this stuff too, because I know you mentioned that Joel Salatin was talking to Sean Baker the other day and on one of his episodes. I haven't gotten to listen to it yet. I really enjoy Joel Salatin and the work he does. So
there's an interesting moment in the conversation between Sean Baker and Joel Salatin when Sean Baker says, "Well, Joel, what needs to happen for your type of agriculture to win out, succeed, and become the status quo?" And Joel Salatin says to Sean, "Well, Sean, kind of in a matter-of-fact way, you need to patronize American producers that are practicing regenerative ruminant grazing and agriculture." But I've watched just about everything that Sean puts out there, and he'll begin his show with a support for regenerative agriculture, but he always ends it with, "But grass-fed beef is too expensive, so just buy grain-fed beef." And just coincidentally, that's exactly the same propaganda that's being put out by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association that is controlled by McDonald's and Wendy's and Tyson and Cargill and all of the big meat packers that are actually anti-American and are trying to destroy American beef production. So if Sean wants to destroy American beef production, then just keep telling people to eat grain-fed beef.
Well said. Well said. We got some people in the chat are hyped up, man. We got Priscilla Michelle says, "I couldn't agree more. I'm a proud Texan, and I buy my beef from my local Texas ranchers." Let's see. We got trying to see if there's any other. Some of it's off topic. I'm talking about PETA and stuff. But people are hyped on it, man. I think a lot of people really understand what's going on here. Why are grass-fed beef producers are being systematically pushed out and destroyed by this. China purchased a prime cut of America's pork industry. Not just a prime cut, but it's like they bought the animal before slaughter. Cattle prices crash while consumers continue paying record beef prices. What is going on here? All right, so we talked about this earlier, and I finally got to the slide. Dollars per hundredweight. We're looking at back in, 2014, it peaked like $170, went up to 180, was that 2015? All fresh beef prices and steer prices. Why are steer prices a little bit lower? Why did the steer prices drop so low?
Because the USDA, along with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, has opened up our borders to imports from Australia, Brazil. Every country in the world is exporting beef into the U.S., and it's undercutting the well-being of actual American-based beef producers. Meanwhile, when the customers go and buy the actual processed packaged beef at the grocery stores, they're paying record prices because those are the prices that the companies that control the National Cattlemen's Beef Association are offering to the public. So they're offering us, the producers, pennies on the dollar, and then they're charging the consumers record prices. So they're putting American beef producers out of business while simultaneously charging Americans record prices. And they're doing this by opening up American borders to every country in the world, especially countries that are prevalent in things like foot and mouth disease, mad cow disease, and other types of issues that have actually shut them down in the recent past. Brazil just was banned for a period of time because they were actually their beef was found to be contaminated. And here we are just going into this coronavirus situation. Right before it all started, they opened up the borders again. They haven't closed them down yet that I've seen. They're still trying to drive down live cattle prices coming from small producers like myself, because what they want to do is they want to drive us all out of business so that they can do to the beef business what they did to the pork business, where all of the production of beef will be either produced outside of the United States or within the United States but owned by China. And if that's the situation you want, then just follow Sean Baker, because he's the one that's in this community that's really pushing the grain-fed beef. And what I would tell people is look into the studies that have been done on modern spending habits. The average American is overspending about $350 a month and forgotten subscriptions and other charges that they're incurring. People are spending frivolously, or have been up until very recently. So this excuse that, oh, well, grass-fed beef is too expensive, just buy grain-fed beef. Well, guess what? Grain-fed beef is subsidized. So the money's already coming out of your pocket into the grain-fed beef producer's pocket before you ever go to buy some grain-fed beef. That's why it's cheaper, because you already paid for a little bit of it. Meanwhile, the grass-fed beef is not subsidized. We don't feed subsidized corn. We don't feed subsidized corn. That means we're not socialists. We're not communists. We're not lining up for government subsidies. We're trying to do it independently and regeneratively. We don't do it the way that the grain-fed beef does it, which is anti-American, anti-consumer, anti-health.
There you go. So I got the RCAF. RCAF actually had a lawsuit alleging that the big four packers conspired to artificially depress prices paid to U.S. cattle producers. And this is in 2019. Do you know what the result of the lawsuit was?
Those lawsuits are still going. They're still ongoing. There's been, one of the things that we as Americans have been privileged. I say you might call it a privilege. I call it a right, but we have a right to know where our taxes go. And the USDA is taking these checkoff dollars from us, and they're giving it to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is in control. Like I said, the companies that control that are McDonald's, Cargill, Tyson Foods, etc. And this money is being taken from small producers like myself. It's being given to the NCBA, and they're spending it in nefarious ways. They're pushing foreign beef onto Americans. Remember, the NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, was the main player in getting the mandatory country of origin labeling struck down so that Americans can no longer make informed choices when it comes to their beef purchases. Believe it or not, most Americans want to buy American-produced beef. And the NCBA knows this. And that's why they had it struck down.
There we go. Defendants worked together to depress fed cattle prices from 2015 onwards. Collusion encompassed 5 key elements: periodic slaughter reductions, reduction in cash cattle purchases during periods of slaughter restraint, coordination of defendants' cash cattle procurement, importation of foreign live cattle at a loss, shuttering slaughter capacity. That's sketchy. That's really shady.
Yes, they are operating with monopolistic power. They're breaking federal law. And like I was saying earlier, is that this tax money is going into their pockets. And as taxpaying Americans, we should be able to file a Freedom of Information Act request and get that information. But the corrupt judges and the courts that I guess are on the NCBA, they're NCBA influencers, much like I think Sean Baker is. Uh, they're allowing the NCBA not to disclose where our tax money is being spent, because there are signs that it's being funneled into the pockets of foreign beef companies, nutritional influencers like Sean Baker, who encourage people to eat primarily grain-fed beef, and other entities that do not have Americans' best interests in mind.
Now, I've heard, to be fair to Baker, I've always liked Sean Baker. And Sean Baker, I've heard him say many times that he does support regenerative agriculture, but I also hear him say, grain-fed beef is cheaper, and a lot of people might want to buy grain-fed beef. So you think a lot of these people are being, influenced by the NCBA? I remember he was saying he was going to go speak at like a cattlemen's association or something like that, but that wasn't NCBA, was it? Was that something else?
And I think that you had pointed me to that, and I had told you that I don't think that that was the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It was actually an associated association, but it wasn't specifically the NCBA, which is the private company that's receiving our tax dollars to promote foreign beef to Americans.
Okay. All right, so let's see. Let's come over here. We got some more inshore beef is beef. We already looked at this one. Yeah, so we got corporate control, corporate promotion, transfer of wealth from producers to corporations. So it's been almost 2 hours now. I think it might be good to start wrapping it up. Let's see. We've got Cholo Mexicano. What's up, dude? Got a nice super chat here from Cholo Mexicano. I work in agriculture loading hay for cattle and horses for 15 years now. We're depleting U.S. soil for massive exports too. Saudis own tons of land also. Thanks for the super chat, man. Yeah, it's interesting. 15 years. 15 years. So yeah, let's see what the chat's saying. What's the chat saying? A lot of people are stoked. They're saying Garland Farms knows what's up. People are saying they like buying straight from the ranchers. David Alexander says, buy straight from the rancher. Imagine, right? I think if you go straight to the rancher, you're going to get a lot better prices too. A lot of people are going through middlemen. We haven't even gotten into when we talked about the import thing, right? So this affects Australians as well, right? This is screwing over the American rancher. But how is this affecting, the Australian consumer and the Australian producer? Because this is another issue that definitely affects the importers in the U.S. Grass-fed beef from Australia is so much cheaper in the U.S. than grass-fed beef from the U.S. And this is due to the legal frameworks, right? Like our government is actually creating a situation where they're squeezing out U.S. producers in favor of Australian producers. Australians can't even buy the good grass-fed beef. They can't even find it a lot of the times. They tell me all the time they can't find the good stuff in their stores because it's all exported, and they pay more in their stores than Americans are paying for the imported Australian beef. So that seems absolutely silly to me. How is this affecting, and what are the laws that are actually allowing this to happen?
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing there, that with Australia, unlike the United States, in the United States, when you produce beef, it's by default grain fed, and you've got to jump through a lot of hoops and meet a lot of criteria to actually sell your beef and market it as grass fed. In Australia, it's just the opposite. By default, Australian beef is grass fed. Now, meanwhile, Australia has discovered cheap corn. Why is corn cheap? Because it's subsidized. And so Australian beef producers have discovered that they can actually feed corn to their beef on a regular basis, finish it off real well with corn, and And unless they go through the extra cost and effort and jump through the appropriate hoops and qualify, unless they do that, it remains grass-fed. They can do some extra work. They can go through some extra cost and have their beef certified as grain-fed. Some people wonder, why would you want to do that? Well, because in some places in the world, grain-fed beef actually does bring back a premium. And a lot of places in the world, grass-fed beef brings back a premium. But like you say, because Australia is exporting so much of their so-called grass-fed beef, aka corn finished, it it leaves the grass finished market supply down, which raises the prices. So Australians are actually paying higher prices for Australian raised beef because their producers are taking advantage of these legal loopholes all over the world that are allowing them to sell grain fed beef to unsuspected consumers all over the world, labeled legally as grass fed beef, even though it was not. It may have been grass fed at one point, but it was more likely, in most cases in Australia, beef is grain finished, corn finished. And that's the truth about Australian beef.
So most of it is corn finishing. Most of them are corn finishing in Australia now. What about when they export it and it's when it's exported to be sold as grass-fed beef in the U.S.? How do we know that it's grass-fed? Do we know that it's grass-fed and grass-finished?
There is no way to know any beef that comes from Australia that it is truly grass-finished.
So unless you really trust your supplier and you believe their word, or you know who's producing it there, you have no idea if it's grass-finished, even if it says grass-fed on it.
That's
from
correct.
Australia, if it's from Australia. And you have no way of knowing if it's from Australia because it's illegal to label, like there's legal frameworks that don't allow you to label country of origin. So what the heck?
Right, so Australian beef, they can not only grain finish their beef, and if they don't go through the extra cost and effort to have it certified as grain fed, even though it's grain fed, they can sell it in the United States as grass, 100% grass fed, because everything in Australia, like I say, is by default 100% grass fed. It's just the opposite of what it is in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why so many middlemen find it so attractive to sell Australian beef to American consumers. And since the NCBA has struck down the mandatory country of origin labeling, poor Americans have no idea when they're buying American beef or not.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the majority of Americans do want to know whether they're buying American beef. They want to support the American beef industry, but they can't because of entities like the NCBA that are taking money from small producers like myself, and they are funding these marketing exercises that promote foreign beef, Australian beef, and beef from all over the world. I did send you another one
image
JPEG that's got the amount of the poundage of imports per country coming into the U.S.
Let's see, is it this one here? Beef and veal. No, which one?
There it is.
This one?
Yep.
All right. From where we import beef here, I'll make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see the actual numbers here. Boom. Beef and veal, annual and cumulative year-to-date U.S. trade, carcass weight 1,000 pounds, import country name. So we got Australia as the top importer.
Right.
Canada is after that, New Zealand, and Brazil.
It's important to note at this juncture, Tristan, that Australia does not allow U.S. imports into their country in regard to beef. They're flooding our market with grain-fed beef labeled as grass-fed beef. Meanwhile, they have banned all U.S. imports of beef into their country. So it's a one-way street. And all of these Australian companies are heavily investing with the NCBA. So the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is working with Australia to flood the U.S. market with Australian beef.
That does not seem like it's going to work out very well for the U.S. producer or the U.S. consumer, especially considering these massive trade blockades that are likely to be seen internationally now with all this crisis being stirred up and fomented. That doesn't seem like it's going to work out too well for the consumer or the producers in the U.S. So yet another reason why supporting local food production, another reason to even maybe get involved in your own food production, right? You're probably not going to be able to do it at the scale with somebody like Garland Farms here who's been doing it for, how long you been doing this, man?
Well, I've been doing it solo for 4 years, but
In your family, it's been a while, right?
Since about 1960.
Yeah. So, he's doing it at a pretty big scale. He's working hard at it, but there's things you can produce on your own land locally where, sheep, goats, depending on what type of terrain you have, depending on your area, people can produce their own food. We talked about Greg Judy earlier, great resource for getting started on some of this stuff. Jim Elizondo is another guy that's got a lot of good information. Joel Salatin. A lot of these people are putting out really solid information on how to get started with your own regenerative farming, your own regenerative ranching. But it's really important to promote, or not promote, but to support your local producers, right? So I'm telling people, go straight to the source. Don't go to the middleman, right? Anonymous, thanks for the donation there. Sending some DKKs. Was that Denmark dollars for 50 Denmarks, I think, DKK. Appreciate that, man. Thanks for keeping the chat alive. If you guys got any more super chats, you guys got any questions or comments to read, we always appreciate that, because YouTube, they like to demonetize videos, although they've been kind of nice lately. They have been kind of nice lately. But the revenue on YouTube, it just seems every week to go down, 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 or every month rather, to go down, down, down. So we'll see. But support your local food producers, guys. Garland Farms has a website where you can actually where you can purchase bulk ground beef and other products. If you live in Texas, you might be able to to buy it directly from him. Let's see. I would like to start wrapping it up. We've been going for a couple hours now. JD Garland, it's what do you got to say about this, man? You got any other things that we forgot to hit on? I know we could keep talking about this for hours. You're real passionate about this. This is what you do. It's your livelihood, and what else you got to tell the audience here, man?
Well, I would say that we mentioned RCALF before. That's R-CALF. And that's actually a organization that is fighting against the corrupt NCBA in the courts, and trying to bring back mandatory country of origin labeling. And so if you feel so inclined, do two things. One, buy locally produced in the United States grass-fed beef, and the other, consider supporting the efforts of RCALF and Bill Bullard and what they're doing in fighting a USDA and an NCBA that is being controlled and influenced by globalist corporations that have everything in mind except for the well-being of Americans. So if you could support those two things, that'd be great. I will tell people that my website is texasfoodmiracle.com. I have been working with the Texas Meat Safety Group over the last year and a half, which limited me to the shipping only within the borders of Texas. But we have a brand new USDA facility that was opened up about 6 miles down the road. They're good friends of mine, and I am in line to have some processing done, and we'll have some USDA packaged produce very soon that will be available for shipment all across the country. So if you want to bookmark texasfoodmiracle.com for now, and in about a month and a half, I should have some USDA stamped beef to grass-fed, no chemicals used on this farm. This is all a natural ecosystem, and that beef will be available for nationwide shipping in about a month and a half. So please stay tuned.
Awesome. JD Garland from Garland Farms. He's got a YouTube channel as well. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about these issues. Really appreciate everybody in the audience for supporting the work we do here, for supporting the work that JD Garland does over there in Texas. Hope that you guys all got something out of it. Let's see if there's any more. Thank you guys for the super chats. I'm not seeing any new ones. I think we're gonna wrap this up, guys. So highly suggest you guys check out the website. We got all sorts of good recipes on the website. I know a lot of you are probably cooking at home, preparing food at home, maybe for the first time. So check out the website. We got a lot of good recipes on there. If you want to become a member of our membership section, our member site, we got a private forum where we support each other, where we support you. We do twice monthly coaching calls, probably do a few more extra coaching calls this month since a lot of people are locked down. Everybody stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Don't freak out. Don't let the media freak you out. And yeah, guys, support your local food producers, support your local ranchers, and maybe get involved in this stuff yourself. So you can become a member at primaledgehealth.com. We got exclusive content there, coaching calls twice a month, and the next coaching call is tomorrow. So tomorrow it's 4:00 Central Standard Time. We're gonna jump in there in our private forum and have a voice chat with everybody. That'll be fun. Yeah, that's it, guys. We'll see you next time. Check out JD Garland. His YouTube channel as well, Garland Farms. JD, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.